Background of the Arab-Israeli conflict. In ancient times, the territory that is now Israel and the Palestinian Authority was the Kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital. In 586 B.C., the Babylonians destroyed the Jews' main temple, the First Temple, and led them into what is known as the Babylonian captivity. In 539 B.C., the Persian king conquered Babylon and allowed the Jews to return and rebuild the Jerusalem temple. The Jews returned and rebuilt the temple in 515 BCE. Part of the outer wall of this second temple, known as the Western Wall, remains to this day. The Jews lived relatively peacefully in Jerusalem until 63 BC, when they were invaded by the Romans. The first revolt broke out in 4 BC. Brutally suppressed, the Romans stripped Jerusalem of its privileges and made Judea their province. The next revolt of the Jews against the Romans, the Jewish War, 66 to 74 AD, led to the destruction of Jerusalem and the burning of the Second Temple. And after the Third Anti-Roman Revolt, Bar Kokhba, 132 to 135 AD, which was also harshly suppressed, the Romans decided to expel them from these lands. Jerusalem was renamed Aelia Capitolina, and the entire land of the province of Judea became Syria-Palestine, after the people of the Philistines who used to live there. This was largely a symbolic act. The historical name of these lands disappeared, just as the Romans intended the Jews to disappear from them. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Arabs came to these lands, and after the First Crusade in 1099, the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem was proclaimed on this site. After nearly a century of fierce warfare, the land fell back under Arab rule. In 1517, Jerusalem and all its surrounding territories became part of the Ottoman Empire, now Turkey. During World War I, the Middle East was taken over by the British. Under the mandate of the League of Nations, England ruled the territory of Israel until May 1948. In fact, for 2,000 years, the inhabitants of Palestine lived under the rule of a succession of invaders, Saracens, Crusaders, Ottoman Turks, and the British. At the end of the 19th century, the concept of Zionism emerged among European Jews, that is, the desire to return to Mount Zion, to settle in the land of their ancestors. Since the 80s of the 19th century, Jews began to buy land from Turks and Arabs and came to Palestine en masse. The origins of the current Arab-Israeli conflict go back to this period. However, the conflict itself has a very specific starting point. On November 29, 1947, the UN Assembly voted to establish two states, Jewish and Palestinian, on the west bank of the Jordan River, in Palestine, and to create an international zone, Jerusalem. The Jewish side accepted the UN plan fully and without reservations. In the Assembly, 33 states, including France, the United States, and the Soviet Union, voted in favor, 13 against, and 10 abstained, including Great Britain. Disagreements over the fate of these lands and the people living on them have led to decades of major and minor armed conflicts that have caused many casualties on both the Israeli and Arab sides. We will describe only the major ones. The First Arab-Israeli Conflict, Israel's War of Independence, 1948 to 1949. The Arab states and the Arab population of Palestine itself categorically rejected the UN resolution. The Arabs considered this territory to be their own and did not want the Jews to return to Palestine. The reasons for this rejection, according to scholars, were that Islamic religious law placed the rights and status of religious minorities below those of Muslim minorities. In the Ottoman Empire, and especially in Palestine, the situation of the Jews was oppressive. They suffered both from the local authorities, the Arab nobility, and from the population, the Muslims. This experience left a deep mark on relations between the two peoples. Immediately after the publication of the UN plan, small skirmishes and clashes began between Jewish and Arab militias. Both sides sought to seize key points and maximize their control over territory and communications until the British troops left. On May 14, 1948, as the British mandate over Palestine, in place since World War I, expired, Jewish leader David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel based on a UN resolution. Arab countries did not recognize Israel's independence and declared war. Members of the anti-Israel coalition, Transjordan, modern Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Yemen. Did not participate, Iran, due to losses in World War II. On May 15, 1948, the day after the proclamation of the State of Israel, Arab troops invaded Palestine with the intention of throwing Israel into the sea. But by the summer and fall of 1948, the Israelis had already defeated the enemy forces. The Arab coalition lost because of the low combat effectiveness of their troops and disagreements among their leaders. In early 1949, Israel signed armistice or truce agreements with its adversaries. Israel defended its independence and took possession of West Jerusalem. In fact, it gained more territory than it was entitled to under the UN mandate. This is one of the main sources of tension in Arab-Israeli relations today. About 960,000 of the pre-war Palestinian Arab population of 1.35 million became refugees in neighboring Arab countries. Thus, Israel's War of Independence created a Palestinian refugee problem that will last into the 2020s. No one thought of giving Palestine independence. A large part of it, the so-called Gaza Strip, officially came under Egyptian control. Jordan annexed the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The Six-Day War, 1967. The Six-Day War, the Second Arab-Israeli War, of June 5 to 10, 1967 completely changed the balance of power in the region. Egypt, Syria and Jordan wanted to stand together against Israel. Knowing this, Israel decided to strike first. The Israeli Air Force attacked Egyptian, Syrian and Jordanian airfields, destroying most of their aircraft. Having gained air supremacy, Israel defeated Egyptian forces in the Sinai, seized the Golan Heights, formerly Syrian, the Sinai Peninsula, formerly Egyptian, and the entire West Bank, including East Jerusalem. From that point on, and until 2005, the Gaza Strip came under Israeli control. The Israelis expelled Arabs from all of the occupied territories and were strongly opposed to accepting refugees. Israeli historian Michael Sterenchi's estimates that, thanks to this preemptive strike, the Israeli Defense Forces suffered only 766 casualties. But even this military victory did not bring Israel the political success it had hoped for. Now the Arab countries were thinking only of revenge. And the entire subsequent Middle East settlement centered on a return to the pre-war border, the de facto armistice line of 1949. Egypt, supported by the USSR, continued its military operations locally and on the front line with Israel until 1973. Doomsday War, 1973. The 1973 Doomsday War, aka the October War, aka the Fourth Arab-Israeli War, with Egypt and Syria was the next major clash in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Egypt and Syria adopted the enemy's technique of attacking suddenly on the holiday of Yom Kippur, Judgment Day, when all of Israel is closed for prayer. The hostilities lasted from October 6 to October 25, 1973. Casualties on both sides were high. The Syrians lost about 3,500 soldiers killed. The Egyptians lost about 15,000 killed and 8,000 captured. Israeli losses totaled 2,552 killed and about 7,000 wounded, but the Israeli army repelled the Syrian offensive in the Golan Heights and inflicted a series of defeats on the Egyptian forces. After this war, the Egyptian president, formerly Israel's main adversary, began to seek peace. In March 1979, he signed a peace treaty and regained the Sinai Peninsula. The Jewish settlements there were dismantled. As part of this agreement, Egypt officially recognized Israel and renounced its claims to the Gaza Strip and its demands for the establishment of an Arab state in Palestine. The heavy losses forced the Israelis to revise their security doctrine. Indirectly, this was reflected in the intensification of the ideological propaganda of the historic right of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. For a long time, Syria also stayed out of the geopolitical confrontation. Although this war, in which the current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fought, ended with an Israeli victory, peace in the Middle East was still shaky. First Lebanon War, 1982. The Israeli army invaded southern Lebanon and bombed Beirut from June to August 1982 to destroy the bases of the Palestine Liberation Organization. This organization had become a major opponent of Israel. The result was a peace treaty with Lebanon and the creation of a security zone on the border. First and Second Intifadas and peace initiatives. In 1987, Palestinians rose up against the Israeli occupation. These events were called the First Intifada. They used mass demonstrations, civil disobedience, and acts of terrorism. In 1991, an attempt was made to resolve this conflict at the Madrid Conference, organized by the Soviet Union and the United States. As a result of the meeting, Israel made the first concessions and accepted the formula of peace in exchange for territory. In 1993, Israel recognized the right of the Palestinian people to statehood, Palestinian autonomy in the territory of Gaza and the West Bank within the borders of 1950. Other attempts at mutual concessions were made by both sides until the end of the 1990s. The next phase of the Arab-Israeli confrontation began in 2000 with the attempt to organize a Palestinian state as a continuation of the Oslo Accords. The Israeli Prime Minister proposed the creation of a demilitarized state on 97% of the territory of the West Bank and Gaza. The Arabs refused. After the failure of these negotiations, the Al-Aqsa Intifada, another mass uprising against Israeli authority, began. The main cause of the Intifada was the most painful issue of the status of Jerusalem. Israel did not want to hand over the eastern part of Jerusalem to the Palestinians as the capital of a Palestinian state. They based their decision on the indivisibility of the capital of the Jewish state and the fact that the eastern part of the city contains relics of 3 religions, including Judaism. In an effort to contain the uprising, Israel then virtually closed the borders of the Gaza Strip. And in 2005, the Jews withdrew completely from Gaza, leaving all of the territory's infrastructure to the Arabs. But the desired peace did not come. Second Lebanon War, 2006. On July 12, 2006, militants of the radical Shiite organization Hezbollah, which controls southern Lebanon, massacred 8 Israelis in northern Israel and captured 2 Israeli soldiers. Israel responded with a major military operation. The war lasted a little over a month. During that time, Israel fired massive amounts of rockets into Lebanon. The conflict resulted in 1,347 deaths, 1,187 Lebanese and 160 Israelis, and 4,193 injuries, 4,092 Lebanese and 101 Israelis. On August 11, the UN Security Council unanimously adopted a resolution on the situation in Lebanon, calling for an end to the attacks by Hezbollah and an end to Israel's offensive military operations. A few days later, the war officially ended. It showed that Israel had shifted to a strategy of preventive self-defense and retaliatory strikes as a means of deterring anti-Israeli military action. Years of terrorist attacks and special operations. In the years that followed, more than a dozen more exchanges of fire took place, even as the conflict moved to the stage of underground movements and terrorist attacks. The most frequent organizers of actions in Israel were supporters of Hamas, which ruled the Gaza Strip and proclaimed its goal to achieve justice for the Palestinians and to wipe the Jewish state itself off the face of the earth. In 2014, Netanyahu launched a large-scale military operation in Gaza in response to rocket fire into Israel. The operation lasted 50 days. It was criticized abroad for the high number of Palestinian civilian casualties. In 2020, Israel signed the Abraham Accords, which aimed to normalize Israel's relations with the countries of the Arab world. The Middle East is still not calmer. Thanks for your attention, put likes, subscribe to the channel and see you soon.